fast.
Possible, if you don't mind, you might do the sound check, please. Test 1, 2, something to that effect. Just say test 1, 2.
Oh, test, 1, 2.
We're okay. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Mr. Larry Patterson if he would lead in prayer.
May we pray. Eternal God, we come this afternoon to give you praise, give you honor, and to give you glory. We pray now, God, for your guidance, your leadership, and your understanding. We ask you, oh God, that you be with us as we make the decision that will impact the lives of our children, our parents, our staff, and each and every one. Now, Lord, as we go through this meeting, we ask you, God, to give us wisdom, give us knowledge, because you said wisdom come from above. And we actually got to bless each and every one of us, God, that we make decisions that will be sound for the children of Lee County. We actually got to bless not only us, Lord, but all children, all parents, all students, and everyone as we go through this series of coronavirus. And we pray, God, for your healing. We ask you, God, to just bless each and every one. Be with us as we make the decision tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I'd like to call to order the Lee County Board of Education meeting of September 8th, 2020. Welcome everybody, and to our Zoom participants, Dr. McCoy would like to explain to you some of your options through Zoom.
I'd like to welcome everybody that's watching us through Zoom and through YouTube. And I don't know if this goes for those YouTube folks, but if you are Zooming in with us and you have questions that you would like to ask, you can go to your comment box and type in the question. Make sure you leave a return address or phone number that we can get with you. We will have someone answer your question as quickly as possible within the 24-hour period. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. Next item on the agenda is to establish a quorum. All 7 board members are here. We do have a quorum. Next item, approval of proposed agenda. All board members have a copy of the agenda in front of you. You'll hear a motion and a second to approve the agenda. Motion by Mr. Robertson, second by Mr. Keel. Any questions or comments about the agenda? All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Next item of business is approval of minutes for our regular scheduled board meeting of August 11th, 2020. The meeting was held electronically by Zoom conference. All of you received a copy of the minutes. You got a chance to look those over. Do I hear a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Burkhoff, a second by Mr. Henderson. Any questions or comments about the minutes? All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Next item is community speakers. Do we have any community speakers? All right, we have no community speakers. This brings us to our next item, new business. Dr. McCoy.
All right, new business 6A. This is the second public hearing for proposed FY 2021 budget. Mr. Roberts, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. Can everybody hear me fairly well? Okay. As Dr. McCoy mentioned, this is the second of 2 required public hearings on the 2020-2021 budget. As we've discussed, for the process that we use is scripted out in state law in terms of the documents that we make available and in terms of the way we present them. Now, it's important to know that the information we'll discuss tonight is the exact same information that we looked at and discussed in the first public hearing last Thursday, September 4th. Now, what we've done different this year, we always have our documents in the back, all the required documents. But we've also loaded all those documents on the Lee County website, the response forms, anything that the public would need to be able to evaluate the information and respond and provide input to you is available on that website. So that's important to know. And the main reason, again, there's two objectives in a meeting like this, is to give you enough information to be able to consider approving the budget. But it's also to give the public, maybe most importantly, the opportunity for input. And if they do provide input, we're required by law to consider that in approving the budget. So in terms of the documents being available here, being available on the website, we feel like we've accomplished that, and certainly invite the public to weigh in and take a look at the numbers and be able to have that opportunity for input. As we mentioned, everything we do is scripted by law. There's the specifics. If you want something to put you to sleep, that'll do it. Reading the Act 97-624, it'll give you the specifics and what we do and why we do it. And it's important to know we have a dual layer of oversight. Alabama State Department of Education provides guidance in terms of just the day-to-day and the week-to-week, month-to-month guidance. The Alabama Examiners of Public Accounts provide an annual audit. And the process we're doing tonight and the documents we generate is one of their top 2 or 3 things that they look at. The process we use is near and dear to the legislature's heart, and so the examiners follow it through with an intense level of oversight. We've talked about this before, and looking at $112 million budget, you don't just pull the numbers out of the air, obviously. You start with some baseline assumptions, and from there you start building. You build a budget from the ground up, and so this is the 5 or 6 primary assumptions that we used. Our primary focus was maintaining, and that's a key distinction. We've been in the position to build, or we've been in a position to need to build general fund reserves in previous years. At this point, we're looking to maintain while meeting system instructional goals. This is based on the overriding assumption now that the current traditional delivery of instruction combined with remote that starts on the 14th, that particular delivery method, all the numbers are based on that being the case through the school year. But quite obviously, if we went back to something that was less traditional delivery, more remote, the numbers would not be impacted that much. We would address that in a budget amendment, but I can tell you if that happened, in terms of raw numbers, there would not be a significant impact. Personnel, there's no COLA. COLA, cost of living adjustment from the state. That is something that was on the table early on, but with the pandemic impacting state revenue sources the way it did, a bare bones state budget came to pass, and there's no COLA there. Number of personnel fairly flat. There's a slight increase due to an increase in federal funds, but essentially in terms of percentage, the number of personnel is flat. Debt service around $6 million. The reason that's important is it's about the same that it was before we went to the Beauregard project. We talked about that early on. We want to keep annual debt service very, very level going forward, and we were able to accomplish that. Now that we're on the other side, our annual debt service is very close to what we had pre-Beauregard High School project. Flat state revenues, federal CARES money. We do have $2.6 million in the budget for federal CARES. Some of it is spent before the end of the year, but the $2.6 million we have in the budget is what we anticipate being after September 30th. And of course, that's additional expenditures related to the pandemic, both instructional and virus mitigation both. We've got level spending outside of capital, and the total amount in our capital budget is $1.4 million. It's very tentative. That doesn't keep you from coming in mid-year and doing something based on need. That is just a baseline budget based on the available state revenues. So your capital budget, $1.5 million, primarily maintenance projects, but that is certainly something we can amend and change as we go forward. There's a quick snapshot. The key numbers there, the general fund, we're budgeting a $1.9 million surplus. That is, in my opinion, a good balance between needing to spend on instructional initiatives, but also maintaining adequate reserves. That keeps $2 million in terms of a $112 million budget. It's a reasonable surplus amount. And as we'll look at it, we get further into the numbers here, we'll see that helps accomplish the instructional and the financial goals. The special revenue, you see that in red. Anytime you see a number in red, you have to explain what that is. Tentatively, we're forecasting a pretty significant loss in our lunchroom program. Now, that's maybe overly pessimistic in terms of the numbers, but that's what we have at the moment in terms of the number of meals we can serve based on the percentage of kids that will be at school and the percentage that will be at home based on those estimates, based on being about 5 weeks later starting. It comes down to the number of meals you serve over a year's time. We were overly conservative there. In my professional opinion, the USDA will provide some relief at some point, and that number won't be quite that bad. And honestly, if the lunchroom struggles, then the general fund will help. The general fund will provide assistance and take care of any shortfalls in revenue there. So that's not necessarily something that's bad, because our lunchroom program at the moment has adequate reserves. This would be a significant bite into that. Again, the general fund will assist going forward there. And I think the numbers will eventually be a little better than this. And when they are, we'll amend mid-year. There's our revenue pie. State revenue is 58% of the budget. And that's important to know because state revenue, state programs in general, pretty narrow focus. There's not a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of earmarking there that funds the basic instructional program. We'll talk about that going forward. You see federal revenue is 10%. That's higher than average. That's the CARES money. That $2.6 million in CARES money means that the federal piece is a little bit bigger piece of the pie this year. But other than that, fairly standard in terms of the state and local percentage of budget for those sources. Very briefly here, we've talked about this in the past. State revenue basically funds the very basic instructional program. Puts teachers in the classroom, puts at least a basic level of materials and supplies, technology, library, things of that nature. It pays so many cents on the dollar of non-teacher expenses, your operational expenses of running a school. Estimates anywhere from 25 to 40% of those costs are covered by state. So state revenue just puts the basic instructional program in place. Our federal programs do supplemental activities, things where we have broad enhancement initiatives like Title I, or we're serving target populations, EL, Title II with specific initiatives and so forth. But the key word there is supplemental programs. Local revenue is very important. It's considered, look at local revenue as a partnership with the state. We're required to provide the equivalent 10 mills of property tax, right, to match our foundation program. We're fortunate that we have a fairly adequate revenue base, local revenue base, because it funds locally funded teacher units. It funds debt to be able to build schools beyond what the state gives us, because honestly, the state gives us a very small amount of capital dollars. Most of our capital initiatives are with local dollars for the most part. So in terms of compared to the rest of the state, it's 32% of our budget, and it ranks us in the top 1/3 in the state in local revenue per pupil, which is the single most important metric in terms of being able to do things instructionally and go beyond the basic program that the state funds. So that's a very key thing. It's why we track it month to month. And so far in the pandemic, it has held its own beyond my expectations in terms of local. We've talked about how Lee County seems to be insulated in terms of our economy to a degree, and that's playing out. We're doing fairly well on our local tax base. Our expenditure pie chart, the most telling number there, the instructional support. Now that's teachers, that's everything's in the classroom. That's instructional. Instructional support, you have your principals, library enhancement, so librarians, counselors, people that support the classroom. 68% of our budget puts dollars into the classroom. That's higher than the state average. That is something you are to be commended for in terms of your commitment to educating kids. That percentage will typically run 63 to 65%, and we are at 68. You can tell people 68 cents on the dollar goes directly into the classroom. I think that's a very important note. What's known as an earmarking state, what does that mean? That essentially means that most every dollar that comes into the system is spoken for in terms of what we can do. There's very little flexibility. 74% of our budget is dictated by the state and is in personnel. And so now, today, compared to previous years, there's a little bit more flexibility. Dr. McCoy can tell you there's things we can do in shifting dollars around a little bit more than we had in the past, but essentially, most of the dollars are spoken for in terms of what we can do, committed to a narrowly defined purpose. And that comes from being in a state where sufficiency of revenue is a question. You earmark things at that point. All right, we've talked about in terms of that flexibility, local revenue is critical. We have $33.5 million. I go into a little detail here because this is an important point. We have $33.5 million in local revenue with $8 million committed to local initiatives for debt and locally funded teachers. And the remaining $25 million covers that shortfall we talk about. It takes a lot of money to pay the power bill, to oversimplify. And the state will fund 25 to 30% of that. The rest of it comes out of our pockets. So that $25 million is fairly substantial, and it's critical. Otherwise, it'd be difficult to do the things we need to do. And it's not just the power bill. It's support employees. It's a variety. It's everything other than a teacher and a teacher material and supply, essentially. Anything else. So that is including a lot of maintenance projects and some of the smaller capital projects. When I say smaller, I'm talking $500,000 projects like that, roofs and things of that nature. That comes out of local funds. We've mentioned this, 68% of the budget funds direct and indirect instruction. The debt load is manageable. We accomplished our objective of managing the annual debt payments, the before and after the Boulevard High School project. And 3.2% of our budget is committed to administration. That's important. Sometimes you'll get that question, how much do you put into your central office? 3.2% of the budget, that would put us right close to the state average. So that's something that's doing a pretty good job there. Critical point, the budget reflects a $4 million lower surplus in the general fund than last year. But again, that's due to state funding. The Education Trust Fund, that's probably our biggest challenge going forward, is the Education Trust Fund that funds 65% of our budget, is at the moment, revenue sources aren't going down. We're not going to have proration, but it's considered to be flat. And we were in a high growth period before the pandemic. ETF was growing at 6 to 7% a year. We were getting a lot of annual surpluses because of that we were able to pay for some things. And that's probably off the board for the time being, definitely off the board for this year and possibly next year in terms of that one-time annual money that we get when the Education Trust Fund does real well. It's expected to be flat to slightly recover, mainly, but it behaves differently than our local tax picture because income tax plays a huge role in state revenues, and income tax has been impacted more than any other local tax source compared to property taxes and sales taxes. So flat state budgets will be our number one challenge or number one consideration going forward. Here's some ancillary data. We provide this to the public and just for FYI kind of information, but it speaks to the board's level of commitment to the public. This is not the type of data you'll see in a lot of public budget hearings, but there's some depth. This board has demonstrated a desire to let people know what we're doing. So we put per pupil expenditures out there. This includes all funds, federal, state, and local. And it's important to note that school size will play a significant role. Ochapoka High School spends $16,000 per student there, but we have 219 kids. Compare that to Beulah High, where we spend $10,000, we have 535 kids, give or take. So the difference between those numbers is primarily due to size. And the reason most of your high schools are up there, the state funds elementary schools better than they fund high schools, so we have to come in and pay for local teacher units and do things, provide the programs we want to at the secondary level. And a lot of times that kicks their per pupil expenditure up just enough to put them above the elementary school. So it's pretty common. You would see this in most systems. Your high schools near the top and your elementary schools toward the bottom because of what you have to do to provide programs. If you go down that list, you see our system average is just a little over $8,000 per student. That's just above the state average. And so that plays out about the way you would expect in terms of the way the schools are lined up. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay. Local teacher units. This is another metric that we track because it represents a firm and obvious commitment to our classrooms, to our schools and communities, our local teacher units and where they're at. Again, you're going to see more of these at your middle and high school level because the state funds more teachers in the lower grades. And so this is where your local teacher units will end up a lot of times at your middle and high schools. You see that list as we go down, and the total is 44. That's only 2 more than last year. In terms of the big picture, we've only added 2 local units, give or take maybe 1, depending on vacancies and how a couple play out. We've only added 2 teacher units. Any additional teachers we've added, for the most part, have been funded by Title I. And this includes special education units and any instructional units. Our key considerations. These are embedded, assumptions and considerations that are embedded in the numbers. Maintaining the personnel reductions that you did 2 or 3 years ago that was necessary to stabilize the general fund. Maintaining those and only adding back slowly and strategically over time, which this budget does that. It's another step moving forward and doing that. Level funding on non-personnel costs. Sometimes we're at the mercy of events. And so if we have to spend more than level, certainly come back to you with an amendment, but what's embedded in this is essentially level funding with the current year in terms of non-personnel. The flat state budget, that's the biggest factor going forward. What is going to happen with the Education Trust Fund? Budgeting revenues, projecting revenues in the current environment, it's the biggest challenge I've ever had. It's just, it's hard to consider, and the way most systems are doing budgets or the conventional logic is to give you 2, a best case and a worst case. We're not doing that. We're giving you what we think is going to happen, and then we'll tell you if something else happens and if that makes a significant difference. I've already told you that if we go back to a delivery method other than what we're starting on the 14th, there would not be a significant impact on the budget. Some impact in the lunchroom count, obviously, because again, it goes back to meals served, but no significant changes. So we're going to give you what we expect to happen, and then just let you know if the assumption changes, we come back to you in an amendment and say, something has changed. this way, but we want to give you one set of numbers to consider. Continued growth in local revenue. Our baseline we've established over the previous 5 or 6 years is 4% growth. That's what supports strategic increases in local teacher units and the ability to borrow more money in terms of that nature. 4% local revenue growth is what we have in place, and that's what we expect. 3.6% increase in local revenue is what's in this budget, which is amazing. Again, I think I've mentioned this. Our sales tax last month was up 17% compared to the same month last year, which is remarkable. And so that's not something we would have thought. There was a temporary dip in sales tax, and then it started skyrocketing compared to the same month last year. That's important. Again, that's part of that. We're somewhat insulated in Lee County and our communities in terms of that. So that's good news. Does that mean it will stay that way? Not necessarily, but we think it will. We think we'll see increases in sales tax. Property tax is not really impacted by the pandemic. It will continue to go up based on reappraisal, things of that nature. So some good news there. Your commitment to locally funded teacher units and other instructional personnel is $2.5 million less than it was 4 years ago. That was necessary to stabilize the general fund. As you're about to see, and maybe the most important data from just a financial perspective, you've accomplished that. Made the commitment you had to do, and were able to stabilize the general fund reserve and get it moving forward. Now, the lunchroom program in the current environment is a question mark, I'll admit. I do not think we're going to lose $923,000 in lunchroom, but the assumptions that we made were sound, and they were supported by people that know. So we're going with that. And then, but I think the USDA, again, which is Department of Agriculture, will help, and they already have in terms of free and reduced kids. They've already provided some relief on the front end. I feel like they will continue to do that through the year, and it won't be that bad. But we'll discuss that maybe at our first budget amendment in January. We have to have an amendment in January to do a few things. So we'll talk about it more then. There is in terms of finances, this is the data point that we are judged on at the state level. You can see they talk about V recoveries and U recoveries in terms of the economic picture. This is a solid V, and again, this board should be commended. That is the 5-year history in months of operating reserve in our general fund. Again, as you know, the state monitors this. You're required to have 1 month, and we have discussed maintaining 2 months and things of that nature. What I'm projecting we'll have at September of 2020, the end of this month, will be 2.8 months. And if the budget plays out exactly how we have it, the numbers that we're seeing here will have 3 months of operating reserve next September. So I would say the takeaway from that is we have stabilized the general, stabilized the general fund in terms of reserves. There'll be an opportunity to spend a little bit and do some things at some point. And so I think we're getting on the other side of that. I think the 3 months speaks to each of you and shows the progress you've made the commitments that you had to make in terms of the raw numbers. I'm happy about that. So that's where we're headed. The State Department of Ed actually provides this. These are my numbers, at least for 2020, 2021. They'll provide the actual numbers after the end of the year, but they'll be very, very close to this. They'll be just very, very close. So this is good news. We're headed in the right direction in terms of the numbers. And again, I think there'll be opportunity for some strategic spending initiatives at some point in the near future. The only thing is we have to look at the Education Trust Fund. That is the one caveat. We do not know yet. Income tax has taken a huge dip, as you know, in terms of unemployment. That affects income tax. And so we have to watch that because that's 70% of our budget. And until we see actuals there, until we know where it's headed, we do have to be cautious, obviously. But these are positive numbers, and we're headed in the right direction. That's all I've got, unless you've got any questions.
I just got one, and I thought about it, that truck stop, in Smith Station, how do we track that? Because, so that wasn't in Lee County, I'm just wondering, will that sort of offset us with the Dollar Generals and everything else, with sales tax? So that should be a major impact.
Okay, now you're talking about additional, Mr. Patterson, you're talking about additional development.
Taxes and everything we're doing the Dollar General, we put those everywhere, but outside Lee County. Now, ain't that truck stop inside Lee County, all that's Lee County too?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that's a good point. You bring up a great point, Mr. Patterson. Sales tax in our district, and our district is outside the city limits of Auburn, Opelika, and Phoenix City, it is growing faster than our portion of the sales tax in the cities. Now, some of that is growth in the county. Some of that is our relative student enrollment versus our growth versus the other school system's growth, because countywide taxes are distributed based on enrollment. And if our enrollment dips a little, we get a smaller piece of that pie. So some of that's those numbers, but most of it is, we just have significant growth outside the county. We'll see that in a minute when we do the monthly financial. That's my third data point, and we'll look at that.
Yeah, because, I really don't say that is, when you see Dollar General, even like Walmart, used to be, you can't even get a park. Time you pull out a park, none will go in now. You put one down the street down at, on Highway 80, same way, it's just constant. So, and then with the truck stop, it should make a major difference, and it is outside city limits.
Right, and that's an important point in that we are seeing growth in all sectors of the county outside of the city. It's not just pockets, there is solid growth in numerous areas. It's not just in one or two.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Roberts? Thank you, Ken. Great report. All right, we're on number 6B, Dr. McCoy.
6B is the approval of the proposed FY 2021 budget. I recommend the board approves the budget as presented by Mr. Ken Roberts.
Okay, we have a recommendation of the superintendent to approve the proposed FY 2021 budget. Do I hear a motion in a second?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Patterson, second by Mr. Burkholder. For questions or comments? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. 6C, Dr. McCoy.
6C, recommend to approve the propane bid by Blosman Gas, the only responsive and responsible bidder. The bid is for 1 year with options to renew for 2 additional years.
Okay. I have a recommendation from the superintendent to approve the propane bid to Blossman Gas. And the bid is for 1 year, option to renew for 2 additional years. Do I hear a motion in a second?
Make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Henderson, second by Mr. Roberts. Any further questions or comments? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. 6D.
6D, we had to do a HVAC equipment maintenance bid, no acceptable bids received. Recommend the board reject all bids as no responsible bids were received. The board authorized superintendent to enter into negotiations for said equipment and services with the understanding any negotiated price will be lower than the lowest price submitted in the original bid. That's my recommendation.
Okay, we have a recommendation from the superintendent to go into negotiations with HVAC equipment companies to keep the bid as low as possible since we had no acceptable bids received. Do I hear a motion in a second?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Spence,
Second.
second by Mr. Burkholder. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. 6E.
6E is another bid. This is for PPE and cleaning items. Recommend the board award the bid to various proposals for protective equipment, supplies, and cleaning items per the attached list that you have effective August 21st, 2020. And we received a lot of money for cleaning purposes for this coronavirus, and it's very difficult to get that from a single provider, so we have to kind of branch out and jump some hoops. So my recommendation is to approve the bid as it is presented in the packet.
Recommendation for superintendent to approve the bid for PPE and cleaning items. Do I hear a motion and a second?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Patterson, second by Mr. Keel. Any further comments or questions?
There's a big difference in the price on those things.
Yeah.
Yes.
All over the board. All right. Any further questions? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those nay, the ayes have it. 6F.
6F is OCR complaint number 04-14-1425. Recommendation is to approve the resolution agreement. We've been working through Willie Sanderson and their Lanier Ford attorneys with OCR and Mr. Fuller. Feel like we have pretty much addressed everything that they had on their list, and wanting to put this one to rest. So my recommendation is to approve the resolution agreement.
Recommendation for superintendent to approve the resolution agreement to deal with the OCR complaint. This is, something that we're just gonna have to do. I think you read what, in your notes, what has to be done. So,
Most of that has already been done, Mr. Barble. I'd say all of it has pretty much been done. Sidewalk poured, concession stands lowered, and everything to meet specs.
have superintendent's recommendation on ACR complaint. All in favor, give me a motion and a second.
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Burkhalter, second by Mr. Robertson. Any further questions or comments? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. 6G.
I'd like to recommend to the board that, starting September the 14th, we start with our original plan, for providing education and instruction in Lee County. That is a virtual and a traditional school. We have about 24 to 25% of our students that are chosen virtual, parents have chosen virtual. We will still continue to serve them the virtual way. And then we will have a traditional school starting Monday, September 14th.
Okay, recommendation to start virtual and traditional school Monday, September 14th, 2020. Do I hear a motion and a second? Motion by Ms. Spence, second by Mr. Henderson. Questions or comments? I'm sure we have some.
My comment is still without the, McCoy, it's still gonna be about the numbers. Now, I wanna make sure that we're gonna vote on this, that the numbers, when the, Lee County, health department or state or whoever look at those numbers, that, because I think our original thing was if the corona numbers go up real high,
Right.
we gotta make a decision real quick. We don't need to be playing around, just trying to see what somebody else is gonna do.
I agree.
I'm not concerned about what somebody else, I'm gonna be fair and honest. I'm concerned that our kids be safe, our staff be safe, our parents be safe, so that's the thing. I mean, and I didn't vote for it the first time, and my thing was to go at least the first, 9 weeks, but since, we are gonna go with it, if you can keep us updated on that particular one there and give us actual numbers, not what local school system are doing around us, because sometimes I think that they inflate it, but that's okay. I just want us to be real and be safe as far as our kids and staff is concerned.
Well, I would think that that's understood, and I also think we need to trust our superintendent and his central office staff to keep up with everything. I know he will, and if there's any changes, he'll come back to the board with a further recommendation. All right, we have a recommendation. Do I hear, we already have a motion in a second, right? Okay, so all in favor? Aye. Opposed, nay.
But I'm gonna nail the one, because I want the 9 weeks, to find out what was gonna happen after September or Labor Day. I'm concerned about that. That's my concern.
Okay, I understand. All right, brings us to number 7, old business, Dr. McCoy.
Old business is, administrative leave policy 6.7, 70.12 is a request to extend the emergency leave, policy that we have for Lee County, and to include, and extend for COVID, issues should they arise, just to be on the safe side. That's why teachers are not penalized should they get sick or be in quarantine or be in a proximity mode, not necessarily sick, but they're not penalized by having to take their own sick leave. My recommendation is you extend, the emergency leave, through this year, through this school year.
Recommendation to extend emergency leave, COVID-related issues for the rest of the school year. I think all of you got a copy of that in your packet. So do I hear a motion and a second to approve? Second. Motion by Mr. Henderson, second by Mr. Roberts. Okay. All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Okay, brings us to item number 8, Superintendent's report.
Back up on, in the ballot box, Mr. Roberts, monthly financial report, cash reconciliation for the month of July.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. All right, we're gonna take a quick look at the July financials. And I think important we take just a second to look at our typical, our standard 3 data points. We're now 3 months into the pandemic in terms of the impact on our financial statements. We've had 3 months where the actual numbers are related to the current environment. And as you can see, in terms of our budget, the blue line right in the middle, we're at 81%, and we're the 83% of the fiscal year. A little closer. And that's important because there's some pandemic-related spending in that number that will eventually get the money back in terms of reimbursement. So I think it's telling in terms of adhering to our budget, staying under the percentage of the year, even though there's some pandemic spending. Take a quick look. In terms of the prior year, maybe this is the most telling number. There's the surplus in the general fund. We always focus on the general fund. The general fund surplus is just under $6 million. It is slightly above where we were at the same point in the fiscal year last year. So considering we're 3 months into the impact of the pandemic, that is significant. Our surplus in the general fund is still running ahead of last year. Both revenues and expenses are running about 4% ahead of last year, which makes sense. We had a cost of living raise of 4% in the current year. And so we should be in that vicinity in terms of increases on both revenue and expenses. Okay, let's take a quick look at our local revenue. Again, we're 3 months in, and our increase in local revenue is 3.4%. And that's very close to what we budgeted. And again, that's 3 months into the impact of the pandemic. So we do see a couple of yellow areas. These are county-wide taxes. The common ground layers, those are county-wide taxes where our enrollment has dipped a little bit. So we get a slightly smaller piece of that particular pie. So the key there, local revenue up 3.4% compared to the same period last year. And that is unexpected and very significant. I mentioned the month of July and the August numbers that are not official yet. We're running very well too. So our takeaway to this point is our local revenue base is maybe not as high as it would be, but it is still doing well and it's weathering the storm in terms of collections compared to last year. That's all I've got unless you've got any questions.
If there are no questions, I recommend the board approve the monthly financial report, cash reconciliation for the month of July as presented by Mr. Roberts.
A recommendation to superintendent to approve the monthly financial report, cash reconciliation for the month of July. Do I hear a motion in a second? Motion by Mr. Patterson, second by Mr. Key. Questions or comments? All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. 8B.
8B, is a note about the Board of Equalization. Olin Price contacted me a couple weeks ago and asked the board to submit a name to her to send to the state to have placed on the Lee County Board of Equalization. You don't have to do that tonight. Just want you to come back with a list of names, if you will, or if you got one. It cannot be an elected official. Cannot be serving on any kind of commission or anything like that. So just so you know.
Has to be someone from the community.
Someone from the community, yes. You'll just we'll work on, I'll send y'all out a reminder on that on the next week or two.
But this person has to approve of, I mean,
Yeah, yes, they have to want to, and then it has to go through the state and they have to clear it. Yeah, correct, that is correct. All right,
We'll just do item 8C.
8C1, you have some information items just in your packet, the 2020-2021 renewal for the ATV general liability. We have renewed that for the Board of Education. You have some information in there about the AASB 2020 Fall District meeting. Will be held virtually. This is the one we talked, I think, a little bit about. Is this the one?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to, as a board, come together and do it virtually, or do you want to state your home or your residence, wherever your computer is, and log in on your own that way? It's got school systems, boards are doing it different ways. Some are coming together, and some are just logging on at home, whatever's easiest, doesn't matter to me. Don't have to have an answer yet, right now, but do quickly, because it's September 17th.
Yeah, that'll be done pretty quick.
Yeah. So,
What's your pleasure, gentlemen?
Doesn't make any difference to me. I'll do either one.
I'm gonna be out of town.
out of town. So you gonna Zoom it? Yeah, no,
I'd probably vote for virtual myself.
virtual,
Virtual.
Okay, I'll do virtual.
We just go virtual then, so like.
okay. So do individual virtual. All right. You need any assistance, call us early, and we'll do our best to help you out. Well, Mr. Clay, you good man.
Remember, you have to register.
Right. And can you do that, everybody? Can you understand?
I cannot, because it's gonna send everybody an individual code on how to
Gotcha,
get
so
on.
you're gonna have to do that individually. AASD 2020 Fall Academy Corps Conference is October 4th and 5th in Montgomery. Right now, we have, Mr. Henderson is registered to attend.
Is that virtual?
No.
Not right now.
Okay. Well, I mean, some people like.
It may be before it's.
It may be before it's all
Comes
said and
together.
done. All right, that's all.
Brings us to number 9.
Recommendation to the board to approve human resources recommendations as presented. 9A, resignations, retirements, 9B, employments, 9C, transfers, reassignments, and supplements, 9D, leaves of absence, 9E, suspensions, 9F, terminations.
Recommendation for superintendent to approve the human resource recommendations, resignations, retirements, employment, transfers, reassignments, supplements, leaves of absence, suspension, and terminations. Do I hear a motion and second?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Burkholder, second by Mr. Finch. Questions or comments? All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. And of course, there is no need for executive session. It is on the agenda.
Motion adjourned.
Motion, Mr. Patterson, to adjourn. Do I hear a second? Second by Mr. Burkholder. All in favor, aye? Aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes have it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everybody.